I'm so glad you shared about Clarence Schulte, How to Die Right and Live to Tell About It. I love that. We actually had them to Calgary. We had them do a seminar there. And one of the favorite quotes from Clarence was that sometimes we try harder. And he said instead of trying harder, we need to learn to die harder. You know, we need to have that surrender. So, yeah, thanks for mentioning. It brings back some memories with, yes, a very wonderful couple.
Then he went on to say to have a marriage that you die for, right? So you're both dying to self.
If you want a marriage to die for, you have to have a marriage to die for.
Yes, very profound. So this morning, we are going to do more discovering and uncovering. Yes, this is so important. We don't do enough of this in our relationships. We just kind of sail through life not really thinking deeply about how we're impacting our relationships, how we want our relationships to look.
So the question I have for you this morning is, what is love? We use the term all the time, I love you, I love cake, I love ice cream, I love my wife, I love my husband, I love my kids.
I love my dog.
You love chocolate more than me?
Yeah, not necessarily, but it's ranking up there.
It's a close tie. So what is love? We talk about it, we use it all the time, but do we actually know what it means? Do we actually use it to define? When we think of love, what is it? Love is sacrifice. Mm-hmm. What else? Love is a choice. Something that grows. If nourished properly, yes. What else is love? Is love a feeling? Pardon me? Vulnerability. Love is vulnerable. Mm-hmm. Anything else?
God.
God is love. Mm-hmm. So we typically, how does Hollywood or Nashville portray what love is? Lust. It's just a feeling, it's emotions. Yeah. Follow your heart. Is that good advice? No. It's not, but we do it sometimes, right? We buy into this deception.
Yeah, the heart is deceitful above all things. God tells us so. Guard your heart.
The definition of love that we like to use is love is a choice or a decision to act on principles that lead to feelings and lead to actions. So if we choose the correct principles, we will have the correct feelings and the correct actions. If we choose the wrong principles, we will lead to incorrect feelings and incorrect actions. So you have to follow the formula and the way it goes. So if you want to have true love, the sacrificial love, we need to act on these principles. And where's the best principles we can find? 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 to 7. You know, love suffereth long. And in my marriage, man, that was true. It suffered long.
Oh, I suffered.
Yes, you did. So did I. So we call our seminars a prescription for love. Where is that based on? It's based on Mark 12, 30 to 31. It says, and you shall love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your mind, and all your strength. This is the first commandment. And the second one is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. So right in here, this very definition of love that God has given us is showing that love includes our mind, our soul, our beliefs, and our heart. So it combines, it's not just a feeling, it combines many things. And you know, God, this is the first and great commandment, right? Does it sound very loving? I command you to love me.
How would you feel, ladies, if your husband says, I command you to love me?
Not very loving, right? So love doesn't force. So how do we reconcile? How do we understand God tells us or commands us to love him and to love each other. If we actually look at the Greek word, what does it mean? Commandment means an authoritative prescription. So the great physician gives us a prescription to love. And we start by loving him, and then we love each other. We love our neighbor, and then we love ourselves. And what does neighbor mean?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, what does neighbor mean? It's actually defined as the person closest to you. So who's close to your circle? Is it your kids, your spouse, your parents, your friends? Yeah, that's who your neighbor is.
So let me ask you, if my mental health was not very good, what if my spiritual health wasn't very good? Or my emotional health? Or my physical health? How do I love God or love others if my mental health isn't very good? Or if my emotional health isn't very good? If I'm not complete and whole? See, God wants to make us complete and whole, right? And sozo means to save. He wants to save us, to make us complete and whole physically and restore us emotionally and restore us, our spirits. So I just want to imagine, so our wellness wheel, so if I was to say 12 years ago, I suffer from mental health, I suffer from emotional health, my spiritual health, and my physical health. So my wellness well was not nice and full. It was kind of looked like more like a square, right? My emotional health was not good. So if I want to think, when we come into relationships, so if I come into a relationship in my wife, and my emotional wellness wheel is very deflated, and I'm not whole, and we come into this relationship, she brings her wellness wheel, and I want you to imagine it as we have a unicycle. We have our own wheels, and now we wanted to bring our tandem bike. Bring each of your wheel into the relationship. Our marriage now is the bike. It's this tandem bike. We trade in unicycles, and we get two become one. We're two separate people. We still have our own wellness wheels, and we are having a nice ride. We get married, our wellness wheels, we're riding along smoothly. But I wanted you to imagine if our wellness wheels were very misshapen.
Maybe my rims were bent. Yeah. And then, of course, my tires would deflate. That would make it really, really hard, wouldn't it, to get on that bike and ride it?
Yeah, what if it looked like this? Would it make marriage a little harder? What if we started going uphill a little bit? We go into, you guys, yeah, we hit the Rockies. We're going to start going up Banff. And is there storms? What happens when we face some challenges and some hills and some storms in our life and we have some square wheels or our wellness wheels aren't whole? Is it going to be very challenging? Sometimes maybe we want to stop pedaling or we want to get off the bike or find a new bike or go back to our unicycles.
That's right. Yeah, so it can be very, very challenging. And one of the things that really fuels our misshapen wellness wheel, we talked about last night. What do we talk about what we talked about kind of the mental part of our wellness wheel, identifying the toxins and the poisons in ourselves that we display in our relationships. How many of you found some? A few hands went up. Yeah. So now we want to move into the spiritual part of that wellness wheel this morning. Forgiveness. And many times this is an area in a relationship, if unforgiveness is there, it holds the relationship hostage. We can't move forward. We're at gridlock. We just can't seem to make things better. And this is huge because when we work with couples, they come to us there in what we call a negative perspective. They point out everything their partner does wrong. That was one of the poisons last night, right? Or everything their children do wrong. So we can have relationships with children too that are very difficult. But that spiritual component of unforgiveness holds the relationship hostage. It can't move if we don't decide to choose to forgive.
Well, we can't in turn love with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our strength. If we hold on to bitterness, it separates us from God and it separates us from each other.
So science and bitterness. So science has a lot to say with bitterness. It says it produces a critical, judgmental thinking.
It fuels anger, resentment, and revenge. We all sometimes like to have a little revenge.
Yeah. It creates distrust.
It undermines our physical health.
It
High blood
does.
pressure, we get, so many health
Yes.
consequences of bitterness.
It leads to anxiety and depression.
It prevents emotional connection with others, with our spouse, with our children, with friends.
It's impossible to connect emotionally. It keeps individuals in a negative emotional bondage. So it keeps yourself in bondage, but also the other person in the relationship.
And as you said, it takes the relationship hostage. It's hard to go forward.
Yes.
So William Brawley has this quote. It says, negative emotions like bitterness can influence stress responses and release the hormone cortisol. Chronically high levels of this hormone can turn and disrupt the immune system, increasing the vulnerability of a person to develop a number of diseases.
They've also discovered that bitterness actually changes your DNA. It makes your DNA less expressive. And then it also changes the structure of the brain. The brain actually shrinks in size because a lot of these little dendrite branches in the brain, which have to do with your thoughts, they actually shrink. And they've done MRIs on people that are depressed and people that are happy and healthy and whole. The MRI looks totally different. The brain is smaller. And then they've taken MRIs or PET scans of brains where someone has gone from unforgiveness to forgiveness. And there's a huge difference in how the brain looks. It's bigger. The actual size and mass of the brain is bigger when we're healthy and whole. So forgiveness is huge. We don't realize it actually changes our DNA. And the expression when we procreate and have children, it changes. So that verse in Genesis where the sins are passed on from one generation to the next, bitterness causes that change in our DNA from one generation to the next.
I like this quote. Many of you may have heard it already. Bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And sometimes we act that way, right? We hold on to it. It's like if I hold on to this bitterness, if I keep it in, if I hold on to my grudge or hold on to this, it's going to cause the other person pain, but it doesn't. Who does it cause pain to? Us. And it brings on health issues, right? We talked about the science is showing that how many health issues is caused by bitterness. So we want to let it go. Let that bitterness go. And sometimes we're so used to hanging on to it with all our life, but we just don't want to let it go. But until we let it go, I can't grab my wife's hand. And once I let go, I can then take and hold my wife's hand again.
You know, sometimes bitterness can be a blind spot in our lives. It wasn't mine. I had no idea how bitter I was.
You should have just asked me. I could have told you.
Yeah.
So the antidote for bitterness is forgiveness. This is where we start to identify the past hurt, which we started the process last night, identifying those poisons that are in our relationships, those toxins that are harming our relationships. So we identify, but some people, it hurts too much to identify it. But if you don't identify, if we suppress those emotions, that bitterness, what happens over time? It builds, and we become like volcanoes. You can hide it for so long until it erupts. And once it erupts, it's hard to put it back in. There's a lot of damage, right? So we want to try to deal with it, identify the past hurt, and then deal with it.
Yeah, bitterness changes our character and who we are. Would you agree? Yeah, it does. So letting go of the emotional pain associated with the story of bitterness is so important. We often skip this step of identifying the emotional pain. And this is a beautiful thing. It's a biblical principle of, many times we have these stories, we're rehearsing it of our mind of hurts. And then some people say, well, I don't want to remember it and write it down. But then I ask them, how often do you think about it? Well, okay, you have a point. I'm thinking about it. So, okay, I'm going to remember it and I'm going to write it down. Capture the emotional pain attached to it and then pray and give both to God. Often we just stick with the decision, Lord, help me to forgive this person. And we stop there. But we don't say, Lord, help me to forgive this person for how they made me feel this way. Lord, I give this emotional pain to you. It's a game changer when we capture both and give both to God.
It's about giving and accepting forgiveness.
And then rewriting your story. Start thinking like a forgiving person. So bitterness can take root in different ways. Last night, we discovered how we individually display relationship poisons. Now, these were my poisons. I'm going to be vulnerable and share them with you. So I was the kind of person who had very, very high expectations in my relationships with my husband and my children. Other people, not so high, but, I could have high expectations.
What happened if I didn't meet those expectations?
Oh, yeah. It would take me down this path where I'd feel like, my needs aren't important to him. And I feel like he just dismisses me every time because he doesn't want to do what I ask him to do. These are my expectations for him.
Well, I could never meet your expectations. They're way too high.
You know what? You could if you tried.
I did try.
Really?
It's just never good enough.
Well, you never did anything that I said.
Anything, really?
Nothing.
I
You
took
never,
out the garbage
never, once. You're right. You got that right. Yeah.
Never is, yeah.
So we have these scenarios that go on. Then I go on, once I've decided, he doesn't care about me and my needs, and he's just kicking me to the curb, right? He doesn't want to do anything that's important to me. Then I start to, in order to get my needs met, what do? I present more relationship poisons. The first one is my thoughts that he's dismissing me, he doesn't care about me and my needs. So it starts here. Then I start to speak those thoughts. You're just lazy. I ask you to do these things and you don't do any of them.
That's not true. Like I said, I do some.
I asked you to change the light bulb in the hallway
Yes,
a week ago.
And I told you I would get to it. I will do it.
Really?
Yes, love is patient.
Love is patient. Week
Yes,
2. Week 2. Honey, you said you're going to change the light bulb in the hallway.
Yes,
Can you please get to it?
Stop nagging. I told you I would do it. Just relax.
You know what? I wouldn't have to
It's the
nag
playoffs
if
right
you would
now.
just...
No, it's the playoffs. Once the playoffs are over, June, July or something, I will get to it, okay? Just patience. Man,
Okay.
stop nagging me.
Beginning of August? Honey,
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I have some support finally.
the light bulb is still out. The playoffs are over. How come you haven't changed it?
I've been busy.
So I go get the ladder, I open it, slam it open, actually, and I stomp up the ladder and I change it myself.
about time.
I said, I don't need you, right? So then I developed this attitude of anger and bitterness that, I'm just going to live life on my own unicycle. You stay on your unicycle, I don't need you. And then we have days that turn into silence, weeks of silence, months of silence.
It was much better that way.
So that was my crazy cycle, right? I became
crazy,
so
yeah.
bitter.
I don't know if I want to talk about my crazy cycle, but so I struggle with negative thoughts. I'm not good enough, not smart enough, I'm not worthy enough, not fast enough, not smart enough. All those negative thoughts that keep on, in that brain, just cycle. And then when she would say something that would promote that I'm not good enough or not do things well enough, and if I would trigger these beliefs. She doesn't care about me. She doesn't love me. If she loved me, she would, she wouldn't do those things. So my thoughts to her became more negative and more negative. I started to believe that she didn't care about me, which led to me my feelings. My go-to feeling is rejection. I feel rejection a lot. I have a fear of rejection. So sometimes when I'm feeling rejection, instead of owning up to my part we talked about last night, I become defensive and blame back. So to deflect the blame back so I can take the heat off my feelings of rejection or abandonment that I'm struggling with, these emotional things that I'm dealing with. So eventually, it doesn't work too well, and I turn into stonewalling or flooding, and I go to withdraw and check out, and we go with, as my wife said, days, weeks, maybe months without having any discussions other than, are you picking up the kids today? And that would be about, yeah, you get picked up the groceries. Yeah, so it was we were roommates, living in the same house.
I was the expressive, explosive one. He was the withdrawer.
Mm-hmm.
But, often we think the expressive one is the one who does the most hurt because we speak daggers.
You do the most hurt, for sure.
Yeah. I own up to my hurt. I hurt you a lot. But what Marlon started to realize is his withdrawing from me
I could hurt her back.
Hurt me just as much as I hurt him. So withdrawing hurts just as much as speaking daggers.
Yeah, you hold on to that bitterness and you hold on to that grudge and you're just like, I'm going to make her pay. But she was probably glad I didn't talk to her, right? So I was the one, again, that bitterness is like drinking poison, expecting the other person to die. I was holding on, you hold on to bitterness, and you start withdrawing, you don't want to talk, you close up, right? But it just makes it compounds, a compound interest, right? It gets bigger and bigger, and that little molehill turns into a mountain where it's hard to get past. So we have here Krusty the Crab. Has anybody, and Pearl the Oyster, has anybody heard of a barrel of crabs? You heard that term? No? A barrel of crabs. So you can go to a wharf where there's fishermen and they have a bunch of crabs. They'll put them in the barrel. They don't have to put a lid on it. Because when the crabs are trying to crawl out, the other crabs below will grab their legs and grab them. They won't let them out. They won't, so they don't have to put a lid on it. So they just, all the crabs will keep, nobody, like you heard the saying, misery loves. So these crabs are really, they're crabby. And do you know why they're crabby? Because they're crabs. Because they're shellfish. Come on, okay, it was a dad joke. Where's my kid? This crab mentality, if I can't have it, neither can you. If you can't have freedom, if I can't have freedom, you can't have freedom. So we're constantly pulling.
If you can't have happiness, I can't have. I can't have it, you can't have it.
Yeah, the Bible talks about, loving one another, encouraging one another, and building each other up. But sometimes in relationships, we start to tear down. We hold each other back. We grab onto each other as we pull their legs on. And you know what? Science shows that there's actually a parasite that gets into the crab. Or a piece of sand. It's an irritant that gets in under the skin or under the shell of the crab, and it actually starts to take over the mind of the crab. So the crab is actually trapped in its own body, and it's just, the parasite is taken over and is actually controlling the crab. So you can imagine the irritant and that crabbiness. So they come by naturally.
Eventually, the crab, if it's a parasite, the crab will die. Mm-hmm. So can unforgiveness be like that parasite within? Yeah.
So in contrast, you know what an oyster does, pearl oysters do? They also have a parasite that gets under the skin or gets under the shell. And that parasite gets in there and it starts to take over. But in contrast, the oyster actually does something different. It emits a substance called nacre. It's that shiny, iridescent stuff, that substance that makes the pearl shine. Yeah, it's beautiful. So day after day, that irritant, instead of letting it take over, it would emit nacre day after day. And after a couple of years, guess what happens? You have a beautiful pearl that is formed. And so the contrast is, we also have a substance that we can emit, and it's called grace. And when we emit grace to those irritants in our lives,
I hear you.
And my wife's middle name is Grace. When we emit grace and let go of the bitterness, that grace can turn that parasite into something beautiful. And, so we have constantly, we can choose the crab mentality, or we can choose the pearl mentality, that oyster mentality. And we look at each person as a pearl of great price. So, God looks at us of what we are going to become through him. He sees our identity in him. And God looks at the heart. We look at the outward appearance. We see the crusty old crab.
The prickly parts.
Yes, we see that. But when we start emitting grace, and the Bible talks about forbearance, as we started giving forbearance and grace to each other, it starts to change the other person. It was the more grace we emit, the bigger, the more shiny, the more iridescent, the more beautiful the pearl it is. So we get to heaven, it's the pearly gates, right? Is that true? Is there pearly gates? Yes. And what does that symbolize or represent? The people that are inside the gates. We're all going to be pearls. And we all have the opportunity to be crabs, or we all have the opportunity to be oysters. Don't eat them, but we all have the ability to turn each other and help in that pearl-making process.
Yes. I like Martin Luther King's quote here. It says, "We must develop and maintain the capacity for forgiveness." Listen to this. "He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love." Do you agree? There is some good in the worst of us and some evil in the best of us. When we discover this, we are less prone to hate our enemies. When we identify our own relationship poisons, what we are bringing to the table in our relationships, and we learn to forgive ourselves for the things that we have done to others, and we accept forgiveness from others for what we've done to them, it's a beautiful relationship that forms.
And again, just a reminder, Ephesians 4:31, "Let all bitterness and wrath and all anger and clamor, slander be put away with you, along with malice," or that wrath.
This is a biblical prescription. It's telling you what to do and how to do it. So we're going to get to the second part, the antidote to this. Everything has an antidote.
So what are some of the things that forgiveness is not? And this is some of the barriers that people have because they think the forgiveness, I have to do this or I have to do that. So what is it and what is it not?
So condoning one's behavior. Just because I forgive you doesn't mean I condone your behavior.
Saying what happened is okay. It's not okay.
It's a sign of weakness. I don't want to forgive because then I'm feeling vulnerable and weak.
It's not a guarantee of reconciliation.
Yeah, that relationship might not be restored. It's also not forgetting it ever happened.
It's not minimizing the hurt that occurred.
It's not necessarily apologizing.
It's not looking for a quick fix.
Oh, I'll just forgive you so we can move on. I don't really mean it. Restoring the relationship to its previous place. As much as you may have that desire to restore the relationship, it still may not happen. And it might be a different kind of relationship, though. So, do you have anything to add to that list of what forgiveness is not? Is there something that you've been thinking about in your life about what forgiveness is not that might be holding you back even? So I love Ephesians 4:2 because really this is the antidote. Always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowances for each other's faults because of your love. That's a great antidote. And it talks about making allowance for each other's faults, and another version says to be long-suffering, bearing with one another.
You've heard the California earthquake rule, right? If you find a fault, don't dwell on it. And Adventist Home talks about, I think it's page 102, talks about where husbands should be the grave for the wife's mistakes. And wives, in this contrast, you should be the grave for your husband's mistakes. If we could do it, isn't that powerful? Instead of being the fuel to the fire, it should be the grave. We should, those faults shouldn't go past our lips and our thoughts.
Yeah, protecting that family circle is so important. So forgiveness is Focusing on the other person and replacing unforgiving negative emotions and thoughts with more positive forgiving emotions and thoughts. That's hard to do, isn't it? Okay, it was hard for me. Maybe it's not hard for you guys, but man, it was hard for me at one point. Because really, I had two choices. I could choose to forgive, or I could choose to seek justice for what was done to me. How many of us choose the route of justice? I want them to pay. They don't deserve my forgiveness. Rather than forbearing and covering over the sin and being long-suffering and forgiving. Sometimes the easier route to seek justice. So don't be bitter, let's be better. So identify negative thoughts impacting your emotions and unforgiveness. So last night we identified maybe some of the things that were going on to affect your thoughts.
Stop reliving the past offenses toward you. Sometimes we ruminate it over and over and play it over and over. It's like a record that goes on in our mind, and it just, it gets stays in that emotional bitterness and state where we're constantly, you can see some of those people, they're just constantly, you can see the bitterness that just oozes out.
Yes, and often it oozes out in criticism. Nothing's good enough. Let's let go of grudges and resentment by changing your thoughts.
Yes, we need a mindset makeover. Accepting 100% responsibility for your part in the negative interaction.
So key. Don't let wounds fester. Discuss your emotional hurts with the individual in a positive way. We often do this in a negative way. Blame and use the word you. What did we learn yesterday? Stop using the word you and use the word I. Express how you feel. I feel this way when you do that. Is that how you should do it? No. I feel this way when this happens in our conversation. So removing the word you.
And think like a forgiving person. Focus on what you appreciate about the person. And then sometimes that can be hard to do too. But if we can look at them through God's eyes and see how God sees them, there's value in all of us, right? So it's a matter of being able to appreciate and look for it. Because when we look for the bad, we look for the mistakes, we look for the faults, we will find them. But if we look for the good and look for what we can appreciate and what we're fondest of, we will find that as well.
Yeah.
Why do married couples make good archaeologists?
Oh, they're always digging up the past.
Yes. We were good at digging up the past, yes. But we want to be anthropologists and look to ways to solve the past problems. Yeah.
That's right. So do you have barriers that get in the way of forgiveness? I want you to reflect on that over the next week. What are the barriers that are getting in the way of me heading down a forgiveness journey with the people that are important to me?
So one of the programs that we like and we recommend to couples is the Reach Forgiveness. So there's 5 steps to reach forgiveness. And if you look it up on the internet, you can look it up, type in Reach Forgiveness, and you can learn there's a 2-hour process that it takes to go through the worksheet. It's a workbook. You can download it. It's free. And it's based on some of the latest research and the latest science, and also from a Christian perspective. So it's a very powerful program to learn how to reach forgiveness.
Everett Worthington studied forgiveness. Have you heard of him? For, I think it was over 30 years. And this program is a result of his research. And when he's worked with couples in forgiveness, it's just been a game changer for some who haven't been able to move past that unforgiveness.
So the acronym REACH stands for recall. Recall. The first step is to recall the wrongdoing in an objective way. And the goal is not to think of the person in a negative light or to wallow in self-pity, but to come into a clear understanding of the wrong that was done. So again, recall, even though it can be painful sometimes, but instead of allowing things to fester, we want to recall it, and then we want to bury it for good.
That's right, but often we are recalling it anyway, so let's just do it one last time.
And what does the E stand for?
E stands for empathize.
And our PowerPoint's not working.
Oh, maybe we're here.
Oh, there we go.
Empathize. So next, try to understand the other person's point of view regarding why he or she hurt you, but without minimizing or downplaying the wrong. So sometimes wrongdoing was not personal. Maybe it was due to a hurt that was happening in their life. You've heard of the saying, hurting people hurt people? Yeah, sometimes we're not aware of our go-to response to just hurt back. So being aware, if we respond that way, how do we stop hurting others and work on our own hurt?
Is it hard to have empathy for somebody that's hurt you? Is it possible? But it's hard.
So empathy is putting yourself in their shoes.
What is their perspective?
So this is really interesting because if you were hurt by someone, would you rather be the hurt person or the perpetrator? Can you imagine hurting someone so badly? Would you rather be that person or the person who was hurt? If you think of somebody who killed someone and the feelings they may have, or hurt someone, rape someone, something terrible, who would you rather be? Most people say I'd rather be the victim than to live in the mind of that person. So if we feel like we're a victim, how can we move forward to forgive? And part of it is hard, empathizing with the person who hurt you.
Next, A is for altruistic gift. Is forgiveness a gift? Is it a gift to us? Parable of the unforgiving servant. We can all recall that all too well. Sometimes we think the offenses that are done to us are greater than the offenses that we've done to others, right? It's that log speck principle. I can see the log in my partner's eye or in her, but I can't see my own speck because I can focus on her faults. But we don't want to focus on our own faults. We don't want to focus on the log, right?
And many times we're unaware that we have a log in our own eye.
So remembering it's an altruistic gift, something that we give even though the other person doesn't deserve it.
The C is commit. Commit to starting your forgiveness journey. And we work couples through this. We have a worksheet where they write down the person's name. They write down the event that caused them pain. They write down the emotional pain attached to it. Because many times we hang on to the emotional pain and we just forgive the story, but we don't want to let go of that emotional pain. So this is where God says, give it to me. I'm here, ready to take it. So just give it all to me. Give me the story, give me the pain, and in return, I'll give you healing.
And last, H is for hold. Hold on to forgiveness. Because sometimes there's going to be days where the memories are going to come back. There's going to be a time where the emotional pain comes, and it's going to be hard to stay in forgiveness. But we have to remember, when the devil or somebody's coming and reminding us of those hurts and those thoughts come back and those emotions come up, we got to hold on to forgiveness and remember that we have forgiven that. We've buried it in the depths of the sea. Even though we may not forget it, we can choose not to remember it. Because God says, I choose to remember your sins no more. So it's a process. When those thoughts come, I change my mindset. Instead of thinking about it and allowing those negative thoughts, those feelings of bitterness and anger or whatever those feelings of rejection and hurt all come back to the surface, you say, no, hold on, no, I've already forgiven that.
So my story of forgiveness was a really beautiful one. So in my childhood, I had some big hurts happen. And it wasn't until we were in our first year of marriage that I realized this is impacting my relationship with my husband. I need to do something about it. So I went to counseling a couple times, and the counselor said to me, that was wrong. You should have never been hurt that way. And hearing those words, nobody had said that to me, was healing in itself. To feel like, okay, it was just a little bit of weight off my shoulders.
A validation.
Just that validation that, yeah, you're right. I can understand how you would feel that way. I can imagine you feel like, and they started saying all the words that I felt. Nobody had ever said that to me and validated and could understand. But then, I still had a little bit of weight on my shoulders and went through married life, had children, and my husband started really triggering some of this deep pain.
Oh, yeah, blame me. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm sorry, honey. But you know how it is. People can trigger. They can push that raw spot and rub it and make it hurt.
Sometimes us Albertans, we come to BC and we can, we're not used to the sun in Alberta. So we come here, we can be out at the beach for a whole day, and we don't realize at the end of the day we get a really bad sunburn. And sometimes you get a really bad sunburn, and your loved one comes up to you and gives you a big bear hug. How does it feel?
Get away from me. Ow.
Don't stop touching me. Stop. Sometimes emotional wounds, we don't see them, but it's like a sunburn. We don't want to get burned, right? And when somebody touches you, rubs those raw spots that we don't see, they're hidden, they can trigger some deep hurt. And it's probably more damaging than the physical wound sometimes is the emotional wounds.
So I went through a journey where my husband invited me to go through a program similar to this Reach Forgiveness program. And we were in a bad place in our marriage, and I just said, no. You know what? We've tried everything, and I don't want to do it. So he invited me.
You're so stubborn.
Yeah, I was. I was done. Then he invited me again. And then he invited me a third time. For some reason, 3 times. Then I finally say, fine. Okay, let's start watching the program.
Let's just do it.
It was a DVD program. He put it in, and I'm watching the first one. I watched the second one, and it's on bitterness. And I didn't realize how bitter I was. So there was this worksheet that we give couples. I did it myself. 6 pages later of bitterness. A complete blind spot in my life. I was totally unaware that I was bitter. My husband, like he said, I could have told you. I knew you were bitter, but I didn't think so. I thought I was optimistic, positive, everything was okay, but I had these emotions that kept getting rubbed or slapped, but I didn't associate it with the bitterness. So my kids were younger. I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I spent a month filling in. I said, Lord, just keep bringing things to my mind. I don't want to be this way anymore. I realize I am holding myself hostage. I'm holding my relationship hostage. And I just need healing. So I prayed through everything, gave God the stories, gave him the emotional pain. And at the end of my journey, I had an amazing healing experience after 4 hours with God. It was like the weight off my shoulders. But you know what I didn't do from that point on? I didn't do daily forgiveness because hurt still came my way. So I started to build up the walls of bitterness again and again. And eventually it affected our relationship again. But I had a beautiful moment for a number of years where it was just the most amazing experience. And you can experience that too. If you're one of those people feeling that way, you can experience it.
And then when you experience it, that H and the reach, hold on to it, because the devil's going to want to snatch it away from you and take it away. He doesn't want you to have it peace and joy and love in your heart. We're going to end with this text, Ephesians 4:31 and 32. We've already said 31, but it's, get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. And instead,
the antidote,
be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. And then he asks us to take that forgiveness and give it as a gift to someone else. Amen?
Thank you, Doreen and Marlon. You know, it is so cool to have a message what you just said, because I think that everybody here can relate. There's this world that we live in is just one of those places that can be really hard. But with God's method of being able to unload by forgiveness, you can come out a winner. And that's what my takeaway was. Whether it's relationships, whether it's the childhood that you were raised in, things that have happened to you, forgiveness is gold, and thank you. We'd like to take a 5-minute break. For those of you that are really thirsty right now, Val is getting some bottles of water. They'll be in by the kitchen sink. There's bathrooms in the next room. There's a little on that wall. There's a little hallway and all that. We have the back rows are reserved for parents with small children for the next message, and it's love never fails. Let's take that 5-minute break right now.